The Brooklyn Nets came into the season with an interesting collection of pieces, but no real aspirations of competing in the Eastern Conference. So, of course, they did what everyone expected and traded off pieces at the trade deadline. No, they didn't do that for reasons that remain unclear. And for reasons that also remain unclear, they waited until the All-Star break to relieve Jacque Vaughn of duties after the game. Apparently, like a very, very strange timeline in Brooklyn right now. Adam Ambrecht is here from Locked On Nets to try and help us make sense of all of this. Adam, can you explain to me anything that the Nets have decided to do, attempted to do this season? It all seems very bizarre to me.
Yeah, Peter, they say shooting from the hip isn't always the best NBA policy, but I think Brooklyn's bold in that sense. And most GMs don't survive their third or fourth and what could be a fifth coach potentially. But that's the way that the Nets like to do things. When it comes to Jacque Vaughn, we thought that him being fired in season seemed very unlikely because of what you mentioned there. There's not a ton of expectations for this team. A lot of turnovers after the superstars left last trade deadline. So why potentially put an in-house or outside candidate in a really difficult spot over the remainder of this season? And then once the deadline passes and the All-Star game passes, you just think that they're going to kind of stand pat. So no, there's not necessarily a logic to this pattern, short of saying that it seemed like Jacque Vaughn had kind of run out as a voice in the locker room and with these players. And even guys that are fairly company line, like Mikal Bridges, had started to become more vocal in feeling like things needed to change. Something had to be different. And we know you don't fire players, you fire coaches.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess, to a point. But if you liked the roster, you knew a couple weeks ago what was going on with the performance, 21-33 at this point here with 30 games left or just under. So what is going to be the explanation for why this happens when, okay, we like our guys, we know we're not performing well, but we're not going to sell off. Like I'm still trying to figure out how you reconcile what they did at the deadline with this, or are you basically just telling me don't try to ascribe logic where there is none?
I wouldn't mind putting a little bit of that onto this. Don't look for answers where maybe logic is not going to prevail. But what I would say too is last year, you think about the incoming players, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson. You also obviously get Dorian Finney-Smith. Royce O'Neal was there prior, but then he gets moved at this deadline. Spencer Dinwiddie comes in. He gets moved at this deadline. But last season, and even in the offseason, Cameron Johnson was consistently saying, well, you come in, it's different players, different schemes, different systems. We're all trying to learn new language, new verbiage. But once we get that together, we're really going to see things get cohesive and see that turning of the corner. Now, there's two things that end up happening. Whether or not you should rely on Ben Simmons to be healthy and a focal point of your team, that maybe could be mistake one. But it seemed like Jacque Vaughn was heavily dependent on a healthy Ben Simmons. So when he goes out, I think you start to see the erosion of, well, what was the system? How have you worked and gotten better at this? And there was a lot of language used by Jacque Vaughn in post games going back to the offseason and the start of this season saying, I think we're learning a lot of good lessons. The players are starting to understand things. We're going to get over that hump. 21-33. At a certain point, whatever you're trying to apply, one of two things is happening. It's not landing with the players correctly, or you are not correctly using these players to the best of their abilities. And I think now what the organization will sell is you're going to see under Kevin Ollie, now named the interim head coach, you're going to see the maximized value of a lot of players that are not superstars, but are certainly an elevated player that we think are above role, but not quite elite. And it doesn't look like they were ever maximized under Vaughn this season.
Yeah, tell me what you think Kevin Ollie brings that Jacque Vaughn maybe didn't.
It seems to be, listen, he's regarded, and this is sometimes cliche terms, a very much player type coach. He obviously came from UConn. He had success after being named by Calhoun as his successor, leads him to a championship. Now, he doesn't leave under great terms there necessarily, but does move on to the G League with the Nets organization. He has familiarity from a developmental level, and that seems to be one of his tenets, bringing players along. So you have some young guys like a Jalen Wilson. He was old at the time of the draft. He's 23 now. You expect to see him get worked in here. But specifically, even on the offensive end, I would assume that he is going to come in and instill actions and systems on the offensive end that generate opportunities and situational basketball for Mikal Bridges, for Cameron Johnson, and then even specifically when it comes to Ben Simmons, who is healthy and playing now, and to Nicholas Claxton. You have to find ways to develop value for them when they are not on the basketball, because Ben Simmons can ignite that transition, But once he passes that ball off, if we're in half court sets, where does he function? Nicholas Claxton is great going towards the rim, but if he's going to be holding the ball at the top of the key, how do you make sure you get guys open? I expect to see maybe some more horn actions, maybe some floppy sets as well. You try to do double screens, drag screens, create open space for these guys to work.
Stay up to date all year on the Brooklyn Nets by subscribing to Locked On Sports today and Locked On Nets on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube.